Okay, let me share my screen. How is that looking for you? I have a new monitor today, so still figuring out. Okay, thank you very much for having me here. My name is Louise Stahl. I'm a Ph.D. student at the Department of Communication here at University of Ottawa. And today I'm presenting a slip of my thesis proposal and talking about a theoretical framework or a model that I'm structuring to guide my research. So this model comes from the necessity of my research question, which is how the credibility assessment process of political information occurs in WhatsApp. In other words, I want to know if the media characteristics of WhatsApp or other instant message applications affect or shape the credibility assessment process. Do they change the criteria that people use to assess credibility, or do they change the characteristics of the media change how deep or how long people take to do this credibility assessment, among and many other possibilities that can happen. So first, I need to start saying that this study of credibility assessment has reemerged in the last 2 decades with digital media introduced new challenges and new questions for credibility. And several models have been formulated since around 2007, 2008 to try to answer to these questions. And among them, we can find 3 models that I chose to guide my work, which are the dual process model of credibility assessment by Miriam Metzger, the unifying model of credibility assessment by Hilligos and Rie, and the main model of credibility assessment by Sunder. And these 3 models are particularly relevant to my research because they are, first of all, information processing models. So they are not about the conclusion if information is credible or not, but they are about the process itself. They're also dual processes models, so they understand that people can take a more in-depth central process or a more peripheral or heuristic process to this credibility assessment. And most of all, they understand credibility as something that is relative and contextual. What I mean by that is that they understand that credibility is not an intrinsic characteristic of the information, or a source, but it's how it's perceived in the context and by the user. So different users can have different assessments of credibility. Overall, these models understand media interfering in 2 moments of the credibility assessment process. First of all, in the motivation phase. So as these dual process models are based in dual process models of information processing, they understand that the ability that someone has with the media can affect how much they are going to go in depth in the assessment of the information in that media. So think about your grandma in a website that she has no idea how to navigate. She's probably going to just read the text and not go any further than that. These models also talk about media coming at the heuristic level. So heuristics are rules of thumb that we use to make decisions, to make assessments, and these models propose that the characteristics of the media trigger these rules of thumbs that then are considered in the credibility assessment process. But Sunder brings another approach that puts media in a central role in the credibility assessment process. But to understand his model, we need to talk first about affordances. So affordances are also, it's also a concept that is very discussed. It comes from environmental studies, and is the idea that material artifacts such as media technologies can have constraints and possibilities, what they allowed people or other beings to do. So for example, I like the example of the picture here. This tree affords this man that like he can hang or he can cover from the rain, and he can climb the tree. And most approaches to affordances consider them relational. So they come into existence in the interaction between material artifacts and beings. So for example, the tree affords the man climbing to the man, but not to the boar, right? And affordances theory is very useful in this context because it allows us to do a user-centered analysis of technologies and understand that the technology's features shape but not determine the behavior interaction that happened inside the media. So Sunder proposes a model, the main model, that puts affordances of the media at the core of the credibility assessment process. So for him, all the heuristics are triggered by cues that are afforded by the media. So for example, on a newspaper, the name of the author on an article that most models would consider an expertise or an authority heuristics and therefore related to source, Sunder proposes that the cue, so the name of the author, is afforded by the media. So it's an heuristic related to the media, because to have the name printed, that is something that the media affords. This way, Sunder used a conceptualization of affordance that is different than I just explained. That is more, affordance is a property of things. So the newspaper allows the name of the author to be there. And it does not include the relation as much as other models of other conceptualizations of affordances. And this model, the main model, gives too much power to technology. But we know how important source and social components are in the credibility assessment process. So although Sunder includes the affordances of the media in the credibility assessment process, in my opinion, he makes it too central. So my goals are to create a model that combines theories of credibility assessment and with affordances as a way to see the effects of the media on the process without making media so central and considering how much we know about the other elements that are part of the credibility assessment process and final evaluation. So what I propose is a model, a framework that puts affordances first and foremost as features. So affordances work as features of any components and information attached to the information, and what is left to be seen after this information goes through the media, enters the media, are the cues that will trigger the heuristics and then that will be interacted and be considered in the credibility assessment process. So for example, using WhatsApp, about my research, that is my research is about. So WhatsApp does not allow people to see the path that information had in the application before it reaches them. It does not afford a user to go back to the origins of that information in the app. This way, the affordances of WhatsApp prevent this type of cue to be considered. But affordances themselves can also be their own, generate their own cues and trigger their own heuristics, right? And they can interact with other elements like social, source, and content elements to create unique cues. I put a GIF here because, for example, in WhatsApp, you can send GIFs, and that could be considered something that could trigger a heuristic, some like novelty heuristic or bells and whistles heuristics, which is, it can be something positive for people that get very impressed by technology. Another example from WhatsApp is that WhatsApp allows users to forward messages, and once you get a forwarded message, you can see if that message was forwarded to one chat or to many chats. So that would be an affordance cue that would be considered in the credibility assessment process. And then last, affordances are part of the context of the credibility assessment process. So we have to consider that there is a frame of reference, and our credibility assessment process differs depending on our objectives and also our context, like in general. So one example is that what is credible enough can be different in a group of friends than a group of unknown others. So this is the model I'm proposing. It focuses in affordances as a future, but also there is those two other elements, and affordances filter those components of information before we enter the credibility assessment process, which is this gray box. And it considers also the unifying model of credibility assessment, 3 levels of credibility assessment. So the constructs, or how people conceptualize affordance, the heuristics, the rules of thumbs, and the interaction, so the actual actions that people take to assess the credibility, if they take any. The advantages of this model is that it can be applied to other media. So although it's saying WhatsApp affordances in this image, it could be changed to other media. It can focus on the filtering process and the creation of cues by the affordances and by the media. Or it can focus more on the credibility assessment process part of it. And alas, media has implications. So this model considers that media is going to shape somewhat the credibility assessment process, but it does not determine it. I'm going to apply this model in my research. I'll have, using all these advantages, I'll have questions that focus on the credibility assessment process. So how it happens despite, without going into why it happens in WhatsApp that way. And then questions focused on how the information is received on WhatsApp and how the affordances filter these aspects, especially when it comes to source and social elements. And last, questions focus on the direct effect of affordances in the heuristics and constructs of the credibility process. Going forward from this, once I pass my thesis project, I'll be doing a 3-phase research project that will be testing also the validity of this model. And thank you very much. Have my contact information there.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Louise. Does anybody have any questions? You can feel free to raise your hand and mute your mic. Sylvie?
Yes, thanks for your presentation. I would like to share with you a new book, because you use the term of affordance and the concept of affordance. And I don't know if you see my book. Yeah?
I can not see anything, sorry.
Okay, the book is How Artifacts Afford by Jenny Davis. it's very interesting because in this book, Davis just proposed, for example, one chapter, it's a brief history of affordance, based on the origin of the concept, about for example, James Gibson. He is the first researcher that used the term of affordance. And I think after that, she describes the evolution of the notion of affordance, because the notion of affordance evolved. And I think it could be interesting for you to read this book, because in your research, the notion of affordance is very, very central, and you need to improve your definition, your conceptual framework about the notion of affordance, in my opinion. And I think this new book, it could be very, very useful for you. It's Jenny Davis, How Artifacts Afford. And it's very important because actually, in the academic world, a lot of discussion about the notion of affordance and the use of the affordance concept for studying information communication technology in general. And I think it's very important for you just to check the discussion and the debate around the notion of affordance in the academic world.
Well, thank you, Sylvie, for the recommendation. I'll definitely take a look at it.
Okay, thanks.
Sabrina has a question.
Hi, Louise. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was fantastic, and it was so interesting to learn more about your research. I'd love to, if you're able to, hear even a bit more about how you plan on testing this theory. I wonder if you could provide a little bit more detail there. I'd really be interested to know.
Yeah, sure. So the idea, at least for me at this stage, is that I'm formulating research questions that are going to look at a specific elements and connections in this model. And I'll be doing a 3-phase study that will have quantitative and qualitative components, so I can like narrow down and focus through the research process on those questions and therefore in the model.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Great. I have a question, if you can answer it quickly, and if not, we can talk offline. But how do you think the application of the model will differ between those who are very dedicated to one specific party versus those who are kind of impartial and, maybe float back and forth between how they feel about the different political options? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, so credibility assessment process, they already models, they already consider for bias. So when people at any moment is in their construct of credibility or in their heuristics, the rules of thumbs that they use to assess that, their previous experience and the previous opinions, such as bias, are included. And I think one thing that I might see is that some of the constructs of credibility might be different for someone that is in the middle way than the people that are in is one end of the political spectrum. Because, for example, someone can say that credibility for me is to be something, information to be unbiased. But for someone that is at one end of the political spectrum, maybe that's not what they will consider when they analyze information, evaluate information.
Great, thank you. Thanks again for that presentation, and everybody has Louise's contact info if you want to discuss further.